So we're going to continue today to talk about health professions. And as you can see, I have some guests up here, some very special guests. These are some of my seniors in HMP, and they're going to talk a little bit. So I'm going to take a little license today and let them pitch HMP for those of you who are freshmen or sophomores and might be interested, after you've seen how cool the industry is, maybe you'd be like, hey, maybe I should major in HMP. They'll talk a little bit. They're going to talk briefly about what HMP is like as a academic experience. And then they have all done internships this past summer in a wide range of organizations. So they're going to talk a little bit about their perspective, what they observed administrators doing in the wild, right? So rather than just listen to me talk about how cool we are, I'll let them talk about how cool we are. So Krista, I'll let you start.
Thank you. All right, so hi, I'm Krista. I'm a senior, just like Monica said. I was originally a biomedical sciences major when I was a freshman, and I think in the beginning of sophomore year too, yeah. I was always interested in kind of like medical, healthcare sort of stuff, obviously more science in the beginning, and then kind of realized I didn't want to be in a lab for my entire career. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more like interactive, personal, stuff like that. And one of our friends switched into HMP, and I was like, that sounds like a lot more like something I'd want to do. And so I switched into the major, and it's been a really great experience. We have like a really great alumni network. There's a lot of networking events. I feel like all of our professors have been like extremely helpful, which we couldn't say for biomed. Abby was also biomed, and it was a completely different experience. And yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the major. So.
Hey guys, I'm Abby. I'm a senior HMP student also. I, like she said, was also a biomedical science student. I switched second semester sophomore year, so I was a little bit late. But I was kind of the same deal. I came here wanting to be clinical, ended up thinking kind of healthcare marketing might be something I might want to branch into. Stumbled across this major through our friend, and I am so thankful that I did. Our professors are outstanding, and they're so helpful for all of us. And what I love too is there's so much that you can do with this major too, which it's not surface level, which is really great.
Hi there, I'm John. So I also entered UNH as a biomed major. In my freshman year, I wanted to kind of go the whole nursing route after graduation. But then I took 401 Professor Jameson, and it kind of opened me up into the other opportunities in healthcare, because I personally never thought of anything besides clinical work to do. And 401 kind of taught me that, there's all these various careers in healthcare, and that getting your degree in HMP just opens up a lot of doors. And something I really enjoy about the major is that it's a tight-knit community. And I really love the support that we have from our professors and the professionalism and the networking events and opportunities that we get.
Hi, everybody. My name's Caitlin. I'm obviously also an HMP senior. I had a little bit of a different path into HMP. I came into it basically the first week of my freshman year. I had originally enrolled at UNH as a business major, but I had a real passion for public health. I worked in substance misuse prevention in high school and thought maybe I wanted to go on and do law or policy work once I was out of college. But business didn't really match that. And I just kind of plopped myself there because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Then I came across the HMP major, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. It combines the business, which I thought was really applicable to just all walks of life, and the public health aspect that I was really passionate about. And that's something I do really love about the major is there's just a wide variety of individuals, some who are really focused in public health and science more, and others who are really focused in business and analytics. And I've just had such a great experience with HMP. I'd recommend it to anybody.
So why don't we just keep going? So why don't you talk about your summer experience, where you were, who you worked with, and what you got to see of how administrators affect the delivery of care?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the summer, I spent my time at Exeter Hospital, which is a 100-bed hospital about 20 minutes from here. They also own and operate a multi-specialty group practice and visiting nursing and hospice association. So they really have it all. And I actually got to shadow the executive team and work directly under their CEO, Mr. Callahan. And with that experience, I got to see basically the ins and out of running a hospital and health system. And I really got full access. So not only did I get to see what the executive team does, which is really high level strategic initiatives to help push the health system forward. Something I got to work on was how they were going to incorporate digital health and telehealth into their everyday operations and strategy. And since then, they've actually hired a new digital health vice president. So that was really cool that I kind of got to see that project at its insemination. But I also got to see things that I didn't really expect, like how they credential doctors and how those meetings go, how they dig into all of their clinical work, and just like really how much depth is in healthcare, and then also working with teams like in radiology and issues that they come across. It was really a wide spectrum of opportunities. And I think that's what's so cool about healthcare administration is you can be as close to the clinical work or as far away as you want it. So that was my experience.
So I had a little bit of a different experience. So I interned out at Mass Eye and Ear in Boston, which is a specialty ENT hospital, which is part of Mass General Brigham. And I interned in their radiology and quality and safety departments. And they both gave me very different perspectives of healthcare delivery in a hospital setting. So in radiology, I worked on their large unscheduled radiology work queue project, which was part of the MGB initiatives. So it's really interesting to see such like a large project happening through MGB because they're the largest employer in Massachusetts. So I got to see a lot of the behind the scenes of how like they incorporate their projects and how they follow through with their healthcare delivery. And in quality and safety, I was able to see how the quality end of the hospital and how they maintain the patient standards and the patient safety. And it made me realize that there's so many different ways to kind of contribute to patient care. You really don't have to touch a patient to contribute to their care and make their experience better. You can do all the behind the scenes work and truly never see or never touch a patient and still have a large impact on what they do and how they experience their care.
So I had a very different experience from both of them. I interned at Dartmouth Hitchcock Hospital over the summer, and I started off in the creative marketing and communications department. And what I loved about interning at Dartmouth specifically was there was times that I had designated with my preceptor, but there was also times that I was in a group of about 20 of us college kids working on building our professional identity. So it was a really great way to kind of break things up. In the internship, I was definitely more on the creative side, which I knew going in wasn't probably what I'd want to be into. But after the internship ended, I have stayed on with them since, working per diem, just in like the marketing communications department. And that's been a really great experience to get from the internship, just to be able to stay on and keep working on a different side of it.
So I also had a very different experience. I worked with a consulting firm, Baker Newman Noyes, at their Portsmouth office. So I wasn't ever around like anything clinical because they're consulting for like hospitals and other healthcare organizations essentially. And I worked with the manager and the assistant manager. And basically it was like a ton of stuff in Excel, which sounds kind of scary, but it was really interesting. And I was working on the small hospital improvement program, which is like for small hospitals in Maine, and is basically a lot of like making sure that they're up to date with recent pricing transparency regulations and things like that. I also made a bunch of presentations, and I'd help with some of their audits, and also did some research for like policies kind of coming down the line for hospitals and healthcare in general. And that was a really great place to work. They had a really great culture, and it was a great experience.
So I asked them to come in. So if any of you are interested in learning more about the HMP major, you can of course talk to me, but I can also put you in touch with one of these guys if you'd like to find out more. But I think what they've just kind of demonstrated is how wide a range of responsibilities and foci that people working on the administrative side of healthcare actually have, right? Everything from about 3 kind of hospital-based, but different kinds of hospitals, right? But doing very different things in the hospitals. And then Krista is part of was in part of what we call kind of a very large support industry that, very often we think, and I'm talking to you a lot about healthcare delivery, but there's a huge, kind of support industry all around the direct delivery of care. So it's a lot of really cool, great opportunities where you can, as I said, do well by doing good. So guys, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Any questions for our before I let them go? Any questions about anything you'd like to hear? Yeah.
So for me, well, first of all, Professor Bonica helped us quite a bit for most of the class, but I was also reaching out to some companies on my own. One of them was Baker Newman Noyes, and actually, I think I only reached out to them because I wanted to set up an informational interview just to kind of ask about the company, and it was a HMP alumni, and I wanted to ask him kind of about like his journey and what he was doing now. And he was telling me about Baker Newman Noyes, and I just expressed interest, like not expecting it to go anywhere. I was like, wow, sounds like a great company. And he was like, well, could probably set up an internship for you if you wanted. I was like, yeah, that would be great. So just, I would say like try and make connections like that too. Like if you express interest to others and make connections, you never know where it's gonna lead, so.
Yeah, so something really special about HMP that has been one of my favorite parts is we have a pre-practicum and a post-practicum. In our pre-practicum, Professor Bonica teaches both, and he'll go through kind of how to apply for internships, what to look for, but he'll also have alumni come and speak to us and send out lists of like alumni and people from like years prior where they interned, and that's I think how I got mine with Dartmouth Hitchcock. Was I think that he had sent along the name of someone who was in marketing, just because there's not a ton of people who have interned in marketing for me, and that ended up working out really well.
Yeah, so HMP has an established like alumni connection with Mass Eye, and Professor Bonica does an amazing job at keeping us connected with alumni and pushing us out there and giving us all the opportunities that we need to kind of network and set our foundations. So I got my internship through Bonica on Pre-Practicum and the Alumni Network.
My internship has been kind of like a long-standing tradition in the HMP community. I think it's been going on for over 25 years. So Mr. Callahan, the CEO, has taken 2 interns for basically as long as time. So that's kind of how I ended up in my internship. He just pushed his application to our HMP, network, and that's how I ended up there. But it's still a wonderful opportunity.
So Dartmouth, for example, is a public, like anybody can apply to the Dartmouth internship program.
Yeah, there was like 20 of us, I think. There was like 20 of us, I think, in my class, and I was like one of, I think, 3 that were from New England. A lot of people came from out west and California and stuff like that, and then just lived in Lebanon that summer. But because I was mainly remote, I was able to just travel from here.
John and Caitlin were saying, the department has longstanding relationships with a number of organizations like Exeter Hospital, where Mr. Callahan has been the CEO for pushing 40 years, and he has taken interns. I've met interns I've met alumni who are my age who did their internship with Mr. Callahan back when they were UNH, students. Mass Eye, we also have a longstanding relationship with, so I can't claim much credit for helping John get that, but Mass Eye, it's kind of a joke almost when you talk to the senior leadership. I was talking to the CFO last weekend. She came up for a game because we have that kind of relationship with the organization. But like half of the leadership at Mass Eye are HMP grads because we have this great relationship, and they love students out of our major. So and yours was kind of a brand new thing.
It was, yeah. For the healthcare guys.
Right.
Yeah.
So any other questions? Yeah, back here.
I know that I always suffer from imposter syndrome and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's very common with internships and like first jobs. I mean, going into it, like I didn't know. I mean, I had gotten experience with Excel and like finance and our class with Professor McGrath our junior year, but I didn't know anywhere near as much as they needed me to know, and they kind of knew that. But that's like how internships are. Like they know that they're taking you on, and like it's going to be a learning experience for you, and like they're willing to teach you like what you need to know to help them, and then like you'll keep helping them. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll say, because I kind of mentioned that my internship was more on the creative side, and I had taken one class in digital marketing, but a lot of my marketing experience was from outside of the classroom just because of the classes I had to take each semester. So I went into the internship feeling a little bit nervous of like what she was expecting me to know. But I think something that was very stressed to us going into our internships was if you don't know something, that's like completely fine, and just tell them and they'll appreciate your honesty and like you're willing to learn. But if you're trying to like pass by as you can figure it out and then do it wrong, then it has a less bad look. So, or a worse look. So I think because that was stressed so much to us, although I was nervous, I also felt like confident in my ability to say like, I've never done that before, which was really good.
I'll say all they really expect out of you as an intern is just to really like be on time, be professional, smile, take on tasks and everything of that component. And any other knowledge that you might have is just in addition to what the skill sets you already present to them. As long as you present yourself professionally and speak for yourself, they'll take you on and you'll have a really good experience.
Definitely reiterating everything they just said, especially about the whole just showing up and like being present. For my internship, I was under the exec team, and my first day I had a 3-hour meeting with the CEO of the hospital, which was probably the most intimidating thing ever. But really just like being there and remembering that like you were hired into this internship position for a reason. So you're probably just selling yourself short if you think you're not qualified for it. And also that you're the average of your peers for the most part. So they know what they're getting when they take an intern on. So don't feel like you're, I don't know, not meant to be there.
Take all of those comments. So even if you have no interest in healthcare, I would take all of those comments and say that applies in all industries that take it. So if you're going to go do something in manufacturing, anything else at all, everything they just said applies regardless of the industry. What else? Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming in.
Hey, all right.
All right. So hopefully that's of interest. And so if you do have any interest in coming over to HMP, I'd love to talk to you about it. And if you'd like to talk with one of my students, even if you're not interested in that, if you'd like to meet any of those folks, just I'll post their contact information on Canvas so you can reach out to them. Great kids. They're all great kids. They did a great job. We were one more. So I do teach if you were to come over to HMP, I teach the finance sequence. So if you're in the management track, you would have finance 1 and finance 2 with me. So I teach accounting and a finance sequence. And then I also teach the Pre-Prac, which is a 2-semester, 1-credit seminar where we spend a bunch of time talking about how do you write a resume, how do you interview, how do you find an internship, how do you behave when you're on your internship, and so forth. And then we do a post-practicum, and then I oversee the internship over the summer. I help the students find opportunities, and then I supervise the internship. So I come out, I drive around and visit everybody. If you're in New England, I will come visit you over the summer. I want to say it was 1,988 miles or something like that last summer. So it was a lot of driving. Went all the way as far up as Berlin and as far south as Rhode Island last year. And then when you come back after your internship, we do a post-practicum seminar in fall of senior year, where we kind of talk about what you learn. All right, what do you want to do next? Who do you want to meet? So we have a fantastic alumni network, as they alluded to. So if you want to work in a hospital in Boston, it's a great way to go. We have a huge footprint, kind of basically all over New England. We've got a large footprint elsewhere, Colorado and California and stuff too. So great opportunity. But more to the point of the class, right? What you heard was just the diversity of where administrative leaders work in the organization and the functions that they do. So Caitlin worked with the CEO and the senior team, which is an amazing opportunity. Callahan is a terrific guy. And a great teacher. And I mean, it's just kind of amazing that the CEO of a $400 million organization sets aside, he sets their schedule for the 10-week experience. And then he sets aside at least an hour a week to meet with the interns individually, which is really awesome. So he's a great teacher, and he really cares a lot about that when he could really be doing just about anything else. But we have, like I said, Mass Eye is a big, small organization. It's kind of cool. It's a specialty hospital. So all they do is eye and ear, hence the name, right? So they're ophthalmology and otolaryngology, or ENT, eyes, nose, throat hospital. So that's all they do, and they're one of the top, probably top 3 eye and ear specialty hospitals in the world. So it's a really awesome opportunity to work in a place like that. Dartmouth Hitchcock, great organization that is kind of got a presence kind of all over the state. Obviously, their hub is up in Hanover, Lebanon, Hanover area. But they have a growing presence across the state. So just a neat organization that does amazing stuff. And then Krista working with Baker Newman Noyes, a consulting firm. But the other kinds of administrative roles out there include things like Medtronic, for example, right down the street in Portsmouth. They make medical equipment, implantable medical devices. So that's an amazing. So those of you who are doing biomed type stuff, you might wind up working in a place like that. And then there's a whole slew of other kind of support organizations that do analysis work to help make the organization better. I didn't have any public health guys here, but we also have a lot of my colleagues in the department are public health people. So they do a lot of policy work, right? They look at, working with local governments to try to make the environment better. We talked about the social determinants of health. We talk about the social determinants of health in my department nonstop, all the time. And there's a lot of folks. Got a colleague that works on, lead poisoning issues, so lead pipes and lead paint and all that. That's her specialty. Another colleague that really focuses on food security. So she works a lot with nutrition people. So if any nutrition people are interested in public health, I'm happy to introduce you to Dr. Atur. So it's a neat field, and so the administrative side goes way beyond just, running a clinic, right? Helping physicians run a clinic. So glad they could come in and you can meet them. All right, so we were talking about nurses. So nursing is the backbone of a hospital, right? The reason that you come to a hospital is for the care that the nurses provide. So we talked about the hospital as a doctor's workshop, and core to that is the nursing staff who actually take care of the patients, in between. The doctor comes in and says, I want this and this done to them. And then the nursing staff basically oversees all the processes around those things happening, right? So the nursing staff is really the core labor of the organization, and it represents the chief nurse. So So my friend Karen oversees something like 3,000 people at Dartmouth Hitchcock. Like that's her scope of responsibility. She's an amazing leader, former Army nurse, by the way, of course, and just a great person. But nursing isn't just in hospitals, of course, right? We see nursing in outpatient environments, right? Supporting the work of the physicians. Again, it's really focused on the flow of patients. But they also are used to do things like, in an outpatient setting, they're used to do things like education. So you've got a doctor is a very expensive asset. Comes in, sees you, does, gives you some, does a diagnosis, makes a treatment plan. And what we see now, you're going to read about patient-centered medical homes, PCMHs. So you'll read about that in the textbook some more. But the idea of a PCMH is everybody or one of the ideas of the PCMH is it's a team taking care of you, not just the individual physician. And that team consists of a physician, nurses, technicians, and so forth. And everybody is practicing up to the top of their license. So what does that mean? Well, there are a lot of things that RNs can do. They're really smart, right? And they have a lot of great education. So they can do things like explain a treatment plan to a patient. So if you're in a practice that operates under a PCMH model, it's likely you'll get brought in, the nurse will go over your vitals and get your complaint, right? Whatever it is that you're there to get seen for. Then the doctor will come in, the nurse will explain to the doctor, okay, so Miss Smith is here today because she has X, Y, and Z. These symptoms have been on for this long, so forth. The doctor says, okay, I got that. Mrs. Smith, tell me a little more about, symptom Z. He does an exam or she does an exam, then explains very briefly the diagnosis to you and says, oh, we're going to put you on this medication. And then the doctor will probably leave and the nurse will then pick up from there and say, okay, let's talk about what the doctor said. Do you understand that? Here's the medication. Here's some of the side effects. Here's how you need to take care of it, right? So forth. Right. So that the idea here is the doctor is only in the room, right, long enough to operate at the top of his or her license. So what do doctors do? They do evaluation and management, call it E&M, evaluation and management. So they're there to use that expertise that they've honed over, their 10 years of education or whatever it is. And then they give the nurse, okay, they may explain it very briefly to you, and then they turn it over to the nurse, and the nurse makes sure that you understand all that. So that's an example of how nurses are evolving. Not all that long ago, the nurse would have basically done your vitals, and then the doctor would have come in, taken your history, done all that stuff, right? Made the evaluation and management, gone over the treatment plan with you at length until you understood it, and then leave. The difference there is if we're trying to squeeze cost out of the system, right? The doctor could see 2 or 3 patients in that window under the PCMH model, because they only have to swing in, apply their specialized knowledge, hand that off to the nurse, and then they can move on to the next person. So they're firing through patients really fast. And then the nurse, who's paid, a fraction of what they're paid well, but a fraction of our physician, right? Then takes over and uses his or her knowledge, right? The nurse uses his or her knowledge kind of at the top of their skill set to explain all this. So it's a lot less costly to have the nurse spend 20 minutes with you to make sure you understand something than it is to have the doctor spend a full 30 minutes with you. Does that make sense? If a doctor costs the hospital, say, $150 an hour, and the nurse costs the hospital or the clinic $50 an hour, right? So $300,000 a year versus $100,000 a year. It makes more sense to have the nurse do what he or she can do at the cost of $50 an hour, and then move the very expensive asset along, right, to the next patient. So where the doctor can use their specialized knowledge. So this is called Pcmh. This is the model. That's a very that's just a piece of that idea. And it goes back to trying to maintain both quality and cost, right? So our iron triangle, we're trying to drive down cost and improve quality. And that, gives a more rewarding experience to the nurse, right? Because the nurse gets to engage in a more meaningful way with the patients. And it allows the physician to be used in a manner that maximizes their exercise of their expertise. So that's an example of, say, an outpatient setting. But then nurses also work in public health organizations where they do a lot of counseling work. So you have, counties, especially in, say, New Hampshire does not have a very good public health infrastructure. But say Massachusetts has a fairly robust public health infrastructure, and they have, county level public health agencies. So we have a lot of nurses there who use their expertise and work with communities that have, HIV, right? So you have they're called community health nurses. And so they spend a lot of time working with communities, providing education, helping people find resources and so forth. That's another way that nurses are used. And then we've been talking about kind of RNs in particular, but then we have a lot of non-RN nursing staff. So we have LPNs, licensed practical nurses, or licensed vocational nurses. They're mostly known as LPNs now. Typically a 2-year training, and they have a lower level of training than an RN, but they are allowed to do certain things. Like, so nurses can administer medication, will typically administer medication under the direction of a physician. So the physician will put in an order for a particular kind of medication. So if you're in an inpatient setting, the physician will say, I want, you've probably seen this on TV, with the doctor will turn to the nurse and say, give them a, whatever saline drip with something on something. I'm not a clinician. I don't know any of this stuff. But the nurse then is responsible for administering the medication appropriately. LPNs can also administer medication, but their scope is more limited. And then we have, I think I asked last time if we had any LNAs or CNAs in here. And I think we had at least one who did, yeah. So you work in long-term care. So there's another setting where you see a lot of RNs, right, who kind of oversee the day-to-day care of patients or residents rather. And then you have the CNAs or LNAs doing all the heavy lifting and the hard work, right? All the dirty work that nobody wants to do, right? It puts hair on your chest, though. It's good. It's good kind of work. I encourage any of you who are thinking about healthcare fields, I would highly encourage pursue, go get your LNA. It's not that hard to get the license. Most organizations will pay you while you're earning it. Nursing homes are always looking for LNA people. So if you're thinking about healthcare, it's a great way to get exposure to the healthcare system. So whole range of kind of levels of education. So LNAs are just a few weeks of training, right? LPNs, more training. You have RNs, 4-year, you have multiple years of RNs. The most common now is the 4-year RN. So there's kind of a whole range. And then of course, nurses, you can keep going. Pharmacists. So not that long ago, it was a 4-year degree. Now it's pretty standard. It's a 6-year degree. Pharmacists can subspecialize. So I had a good friend of mine in the Army, started out as just a regular staff pharmacist. And then he went to a oncology residency for a pharmacy residency. So he learned how to prepare chemotherapy drugs, right? Which are, chemotherapy is just another word for poison. So he learned how to mix these incredibly dangerous drugs. Chemotherapy is basically how much poison can we put in your body that will hopefully kill the cancer without killing you. It's kind of the, right? That's basically what that is. And I swear, I always say this, 50 or 75 years from now, people are going to look back on us and our chemotherapy and they're going to be like, that's like one step from bleeding people. What the hell were you all thinking? I swear that, maybe you'll see it in your lifetime. But it's the best we can do. So he studied how to properly administer chemotherapy drugs, but he also looked at things like, so there's a lot of side effects for when you're getting chemotherapy. If any of you have had loved ones who went through that, it's a pretty horrific process. And so his deep knowledge of pharmaceuticals allowed him to actually advise physicians on different options for patients. So he worked with the oncology team, which would be the oncologist, the physician, oncology nurses, and then himself. So they're part of this team of specialists who were working on different issues. So his responsibility was often to actually like mix up the drugs, in sort of a laboratory environment, and then come out and administer them to patients who are coming in for their chemotherapy sequence. We also have nuclear medicine pharmacy. So there are certain radiology imaging tests where they pump you up full of radioactive dyes. So a nuclear medicine pharmacist will mix that up so that when they shoot you up with the dye, it doesn't kill you, right? So it's an important field. And so there's a bunch of different fields like that. And then we can see pharmacists, like down at Rite Aid or CVS, whatever, that's kind of your retail pharmacy. But hospitals have to typically have both inpatient and outpatient pharmacies. So most hospitals have sort of a retail pharmacy where if you get seen in the hospital, you're getting discharged, you can swing down to the pharmacy and pick up meds. But they also must have an inpatient pharmacy, because if you're an inpatient and you're getting cared for in the organization overnight, somebody's got to mix up the IVs and all the other things that you're taking while you're an inpatient. So hospitals have that kind of unique 24/7 operation where there's always a pharmacist in the building making sure that the drugs that are being administered through the night to patients are safe and appropriate. And my friend who I was talking about, and I have a bunch of pharmacy friends, great people, and it's a great field. And you get paid really well. It's like graduate and start making well over $100,000 a year. So if you're, I don't think we have a pharmacy degree here at UNH, but it's something, if you're interested in it is a good field. But they are responsible for checking the medications, and then they do things like review. So a pharmacist in a PCMH environment, right? The medical home environment, there will typically be a pharmacist on the medical home team who will review all of your drugs. So especially if you are someone with multiple chronic conditions, which is not uncommon as you get older, right? Will review the cocktail of drugs that you're taking, because you might go, you've developed some new symptom, you get sent off to a specialist. The specialist says, oh, take this drug, and doesn't necessarily realize that you're already on 3 or 4 other medications. And now those 3 or 4 other medications start interacting with this 5th medication in a way that maybe isn't healthy. So pharmacists are used in that way to kind of provide advice and review and support, because a physician sometimes doesn't actually know the best medication, right, for a condition. So my friend very often would consult, even when he was working on the outpatient side. He would, a patient would come in, tell him, he'd see what the medication was, and because you're working in the military health system, he could see all your other medications you're already on, and he'd be like, oh, hey, you're already on this, this, and this. This one is known to have an interaction with this one. Let me pick up my phone and call your doctor and say, and let him know that, because maybe the doctor didn't realize it. Because the pharmacists often know because of their specialization, actually know more about the drugs than the doctors do. And they may have other alternatives that they can offer. So it's more than kind of probably what you're used to thinking about, right? When you just like go to Rite Aid to pick up your whatever, right? You know, your amoxicillin because you fell down and got an infection. So dentists, really important. Oral health is actually really important. If you think about it, like, I mean, we take it for granted because most of us have access to dental care. But if you jump in our time machine to our pre-industrial period, imagine how hard it would be to function if you had an infected tooth, right? Huge amount of pain. It would be hard to eat, right? If you lost your teeth and couldn't get, prosthetics, or you couldn't get false teeth, you couldn't chew, right? George Washington had teeth made out of false teeth, apparently, and I think they were made out of horse teeth. So imagine trying to, wooden false teeth that, maybe made, maybe with horse teeth in them or something like that. That was the technology of the time. But imagine how hard it would be to function without teeth, right? Without the ability to get that kind of care. And the other thing is that the mouth, if you think about it, the mouth is an opening into the rest of the body. And so it's one of the ways that we get infection into our body. So if you get infection, poor dental hygiene is tied to cardiovascular disease. So there are a lot of diseases that come into the body through poor dental hygiene. So brush your teeth, floss, do your care. Dentists provide an important part of our care. And honestly, I don't really know why. I mean, dentists evolved as a separate part of medical care, but they really are kind of part of the same system. So, it's one of those path dependencies where, we were talking about how the US healthcare system evolved, that for whatever reason, dental care is kind of off by itself as its own service. So allied health, licensed, and so we're going to split allied health into licensed independent providers as well as, and then more technologists. So a number of you are pursuing occupational therapy, I know. We've talked a little bit about some of these areas, right? Physical therapy, very much focused on the gross motor movements and restoring the ability to move. OT, much more focused on ADLs and IADLs, right? Being able to function in life, right? But these are practices that are licensed. Recreational therapy, anybody in RMP? I'm just curious. So this is a cool field. It's something I literally didn't know about because it's not something we have in the military until I got here. But this is and this is kind of a growing field, but the recreational therapy uses recreational activities as therapy. So let me give you an example. Has anybody seen Northeast Passage banging around campus? The organization Northeast Passage. So they provide, so Northeast Passage is a nonprofit organization that's affiliated with UNH. They used to have their offices in Hewitt in the basement. They've since moved out to some lease space out past the horse stables. But Northeast Passage was founded by a UNH grad who is a recreational therapist. And what she was doing was she was a recreational therapist in a rehabilitation hospital. So if you had a serious injury, like you were in a car crash and you lost the use of your legs, right? So maybe you had a severed spinal column, spinal cord, maybe low enough that you lost the use of your legs. And so what the recreational therapist will do is as part of your recovery therapy, will come in and say, well, what did you used to do for fun before your accident? You say, well, I used to really be into bicycling. And the recreation therapist will say, that's fabulous. We have these hand bicycles that I'm going to teach you how to use, right? And you can borrow them and use them while you're here. And so this is, while you're here in the hospital. Or, I used to like to swim. That's great. We can outfit you with floats so that you can get back out and swim. Now, one of the things that you have to learn if you become, if you become a paraplegic, so let's say you lose the use of your legs, or if you lose your legs, is you have to learn how to make what's called a transfer, right? So that means you're in bed, right? And you need to transfer from bed to your wheelchair, right? Or you need to transfer from your wheelchair to the toilet, right? This is a new skill. So now imagine, pretty easy to get out of bed and move around if you have the use of your legs, but now you can't use your legs. So you can use your upper body, but you can't use your legs. So there are, of course, techniques for how to do that. And they're very similar to making a transfer from a chair to the seat of a recumbent bike. And so what recreational therapists do is they teach you how to make chair transfers by giving you something that you like to do, right? So they give you the internal motivation to be like, hey, we're going to teach you how to use your butt, use this hand cycle, right? But in order for you to use the hand cycle independently, you're going to have to learn how to get from your wheelchair into the hand cycle. Well, that's a generalizable skill that's also, oh, by the way, useful for getting from your wheelchair to a toilet or from your wheelchair to a regular chair or whatever, right? And so that's the technique that they use. And it's a really cool idea. And I know OT does the same thing in a lot of cases. And so the two fields are very closely related. But that's kind of the genius behind that field. It's a really neat, it's a really neat idea. And so I'm blanking on her name. The woman who founded Northeast Passage had been working in an inpatient environment, and she realized that there was no, at least in the Seacoast area, there was no kind of follow-on recreational therapy available to people after they got discharged from the hospital. So you'd do however much long at a rehabilitation hospital, and then there was nothing after that. So she founded Northeast Passage in part to provide those services after discharge for patients who had gone through life-altering events. And she ran that out of the back of her car for a long time. And eventually, created this foundation, Northeast Passage. Today, it's an amazing organization, and they have kind of a recreational therapy component to their organization. They rent out, hand cycles, and they do a whole slew of adaptive sports for people with disabilities. So they, and they run things like kayaking trips, and they rent out skis for people who are people who are wheelchair bound. So it's a mono ski kind of thing. We have a UNH sled hockey team that is sponsored by Northeast Passage, and I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but sled hockey is like you sit in with like basically like a big ice skate, right? And they use these little, it looks like little tiny hockey sticks. On one side is like a metal divoted thing that they use to propel themselves, and then the other side is their like little thing they hit the puck with, and that's an Olympic Paralympic sport now, and the UNH team is very good. So they do all these kind of adaptive sports. Then they also work with schools to provide recreational opportunities for kids with disabilities in the school system. So it's a really cool field if you're interested. They also have, by the way, a master's degree program that even if you don't have an undergrad in RMP in rec therapy, you can go straight in sort of a direct entry program where you can just do for 2 years and get a master's in rec therapy and become a certified recreational therapist. And it's a great field. So it's one of those ones where like I didn't know about this until I got here, and I think it's a underappreciated field. Licensed clinic. So these are licensed fields. So licensed clinical social worker. Some of you probably go to therapy. If you see an LCSW, that's a licensed clinical social worker. Master's degree program. We have the program here at UNH. If that's something that interests you, right? You can do talk therapy as part of a mental health team. Clinical psychologist, also considered allied health, typically PhD level training. Clinical psychologists can do talk therapy. Some special, but then there's a lot of different specializations. So they do things like testing. So if you were ever tested for ADHD or tested for, by a school psychologist, a lot of times the schools will employ a clinical psychologist who specializes in testing, IQ testing, any other kinds of testing for different emotional and social issues. That's a big part of what clinical psychologists do. So there's a whole range of these licensed individual providers that fit into kind of the allied health world. So it's cool. A lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool opportunities. But then allied health is broader than that. It includes, we've talked about like lab technicians and technologists. These are people that don't necessarily have a license to practice, but practice under the license of someone else. You have OT technicians, physical therapy technicians. So people who have studied, have a shorter period of study, and then work under a licensed therapist. So if you go to physical therapy, you might see a physical therapist at first, and then the physical therapist develops the plan of therapy and then turns you over to a technician to actually execute the therapy. We do a lot of this in the military. We make an extensive use of physical therapy technicians, occupational therapy technicians. Rad techs, as I like to call them, radiology technicians. Another example, so these are the people, you have the radiologist, right, who reads your images that are taken, but chances are you're not going to meet, if you're getting just a chest x-ray or you banged your knee and you're getting and maybe you're trying to get an image of the damage you did. Chances are you're going to meet the rad tech. You probably won't ever meet the radiologist, right? So the rad tech is the person that actually operates the equipment. 2-year degree for basic rad tech mostly. So it's a great field. I've had a chance to talk with a lot of these folks over the years, and they're very proud of what they do, because like if you've got a broken bone or something that trying to get the right image in the right way without hurting you, that takes a lot of talent and practice. So it's a neat field. Ultrasound, newer technology, right? So instead of using radiation, we're using sound. So that's you can become an ultrasound technician, about a year's training. All of these pay well, right? So a lot of opportunity for people. We talked about administrators today. You got a chance to meet some of my students. But so there's things that they will likely do when they graduate. So if you were to come over to HMP, or you don't have to, frankly, there's most of these jobs are open to pretty much anybody at the entry level, with a couple of exceptions. Licensed nursing home administrator is one of those exceptions. So kind of basic entry-level job in healthcare, patient service representative or ambulatory service representative, PSR, ASR. These are the people that run the front desks, right? You could do that work now. I will tell you, if you're interested in getting a job in a hospital, I have lots of connections locally where you can get pretty good money for weekend, work. They're always looking to hire PSRs to work in the emergency department on the weekends and overnights, right? Kind of the hours that you guys can do. people with families don't want to do, right? So they don't want to work the night shift. They don't want to work, Saturday and Sunday, but that's the time probably that would be ideal for you to, pick up a shift or two. And the money is good, we're talking $15 an hour, typically starting for something like that. For something that, you basically learn on the job. For my students, the PSR is kind of the gateway into healthcare operations. If you're interested, I did it, you've got your Health Leader Forge requirement coming up shortly. I did an interview with the CEO of Mass Eye and Ear a number of years back, John Fernandez. I had an interesting conversation with him. He was the COO of the Brigham before he came over to Mass Eye. Have I told you this story already? Tell me I'm not repeating myself. I say the story a lot, but okay. I think I told it to at least one of you. But he, when I interviewed him, we were talking about his background, and what it was like to be a COO of this enormous organization. And he said, people would come to my office and say, hey, I want to be a COO like you someday. What do I got to do? And what's it like? What do I got to do? And he said, well, do you like answering the phone? And you're like, what do you mean? You're like, well, you as the COO, you have to care about how the phone is answered, right? That's part of your job. And so that's kind of, and like, what does that mean? Like, because when he was saying that to me, I was like, oh, I'm not sure I'm completely following. Okay. So what he's saying is you have to understand the patient's experience at the front, starting at the front desk and getting checked in. Is the patient being treated well, right? When the phone rings, does somebody answer the phone politely and appropriately? Do they provide good service over the phone? When the patient comes in, are they greeted appropriately? Are they treated with respect, right? Are the appointments being made appropriately? That's all PSR level work. It's low level work. But here's the COO of one of the largest hospitals, in the country, talking about how important it is that if you want to be a COO, you have to care about how the phone gets answered. So that really kind of goes back to like, the COO is the person that oversees the operations of an organization, whether it's a hospital or anything else, right? Bank or whatever. And the COO has to care. What he was trying to say was the COO has to care about the entire operation and how the customer, in the case of a hospital, the patients are treated. And that starts with that frontline work. So if you're interested in, someday being a COO, of an organization, whether it's a hospital or anything else, you have to learn how the front line operates. And so folks that want to go into operations on the operational side of healthcare need to kind of start at the bottom and work your way up. So our students, a lot of them take these kind of PSR jobs, which are kind of, which are beneath them, frankly. They're way overqualified for them. But if you don't know how to do that, you can't get to be a COO, right? You have to care about how the phone gets answered. So that's the gateway to kind of operations. On the other hand, if you really don't care about how the phone gets answered, which is more like me, so my career, I went, I got put into a clinical setting initially, but I eventually found my way over to finance because I don't care that much about how the phone gets answered. And that's just a preference, right? We need all kinds of people in all kinds of jobs. And that's just not, operations is just not my thing for a whole bunch of reasons. I do care about how the phone gets answered, but I don't want to be responsible for it. So revenue cycle analyst is, the revenue cycle is how money is made by the organization. Every organization, every type of organization has a revenue cycle, right? But this is really, if you think about it, it's how do we make sales? How do we bring in revenues into the organization? So for a hospital, that's all about, it begins with making an appointment so that you can bring the patient in. Then it is it's boring stuff, but it is collecting the patients. You've been there, right? You go to see the doctor, the first thing they ask you is, can I have your insurance card, please? Then you sign a bunch of things saying, yeah, I'll pay the bill, even if insurance doesn't cover it, yada, yada, yada. That's revenue cycle. My students, a lot of them will go into be revenue cycle analysts, which is kind of a step back from that. And they will look at, the flow of money coming in, matching up all the insurance, dealing with insurance companies that don't want to pay the bills or saying that you didn't properly code the visit so that the insurance company will acknowledge that the care was provided. So revenue cycle analysts do, so this is more what I did, work that I ultimately kind of oversaw, not so, was kind of the financial side of the organization. Information systems analysts, great job here too. IT, I mean, man, if you enjoy IT or think you can enjoy IT or you can make yourself enjoy IT, it's a very good field with a lot. It's very, very well compensated, and it's actually is very interesting. There's a lot of really neat problems and puzzles to be solved. A hospital is basically a giant information collecting and processing organization, right? Everything from the billing and all that stuff that I'm describing, but also the clinical information systems are vital. I mean, they're literally life and death. Wrong information gets into the clinical information system, and people will die because they'll get the wrong drugs at the wrong time, right? It is a incredibly critical function. So a lot of my students, when they graduate, go into this kind of IS side of things, and that's a great area. Everything in healthcare now is built around the electronic health record. It is the brain of the organization. So it's a neat field. LNAs or LNHAs, licensed nursing home administrator. I've talked a little bit about this, but so in New Hampshire, you have to have to qualify to be a nursing home administrator. So this is the person who is overall in charge of a nursing home. Nursing homes cannot function without a licensed nursing home administrator in every state I'm aware of. Of course, it's a state level requirement. The requirements to become a licensed nursing home administrator vary across the board. There is a national exam that most of them take. In New Hampshire, we have believe it or not, in the Live Free or Die state, we have stricter requirements than most states do. In Massachusetts, well, in most states, you have to do what's called an AIT, an administrator in training, AIT, administrator in training experience. In New Hampshire, that's a year long. And basically it's like it's an internship. It's a year-long internship where you rotate to all the different parts of the organization, learn how the kitchen works, how how dietary works, how the laundry works, how, maintenance works, and so on. And then you take, after you're done that, after you finish that, you can apply to take your boards, and then you can become licensed to run a nursing home. If for the right person, again, do you care about answering the phone? Okay, well, maybe you want to be in hospital operations. If you love old people, this is a fabulous place to be. If you are anybody an RA? Anybody an RA? Resident assistant? Yeah, one. Okay, great. So you'd probably be good at this, right? If you like being an RA, like a nursing home administrator is like being an RA, but for old people, right? So you create. So what do? They create a community, right? You're creating an environment. This is a home for many of your residents, right? They call them residents, not patients, because this is their home. So you're going to create a home as much as possible, a home-like environment where they're safe. But importantly, not just safe, right? Because you care about their health in the sense of you're not just trying to keep them free of disease. You're now responsible for their well-being, their mental well-being, right? And so you can't just kind of lock them up in their room all day. They've got to have things to do. They've got to have good food, right? You have to create a community. They need people to talk to. So it's a really cool field if you like old people, right? And if you want to be, one of the things I tell my students is, if you want to really be like close to the people you're caring about. So a lot of my students say, I think I really want to be a nurse. I'm like, well, okay, why do you want to be a nurse? Well, I really want to interact with the patients. I don't want to sit, in a back office doing Excel like you used to do. I said, okay, well, that's good. You got to know what you want to do, right? I said, have you thought about being a nursing home administrator? Because every day you're going to be walking around and interacting with the patients. They know you, I mean, not patient residents, they know you, they should know you, because you're responsible for their livelihood. So it's a really great field. And the pay is really good, right? And HMP is a good preparation for that, but you can also, there are in New Hampshire, we have a list of courses that you have to have had or something equivalent to it. So HMP is a really good preparation for that, but other majors can do the same. So those are kind of entry level roles, and then they roll up to, you know, higher and higher levels of responsibility. You know, looking broadly at the kind of the functions in healthcare, and more particularly at, you know, say a healthcare delivery organization like a hospital, you know, you have operations, right? So we talked a little bit about, you know, how does the doctor ought to be able to walk into the ward or the OR and say, you know, put on my gloves, let me do my, you know, let me do my thing. The fact that, you know, the gloves are there, the instruments are sterilized, the lights are there and they're working, the equipment is there and it's working. All that stuff, the doctor shouldn't have to think about it. The nurses should be able to just walk to a supply cabinet and have it be full of whatever they need, right? But that stuff doesn't just happen. It's not like fairies come in the middle of the night and do that, right? That happens because somebody is running the operation effectively. So that kind of goes back to that, you know, you have to care about how the phones are answered, but you have to care about everything else too. Who's responsible for making sure? Can you imagine if the trash doesn't get taken out, or the, you know, or the floors don't get clean in a hospital? That turns into like a highly dangerous infectious disease situation like that, right? So all those things have, that rolls up under operations. Finance, you know, it is, you know, the revenue cycle thing I talked about, the bringing in the money. It is, you know, making sure everybody gets paid. It is acquiring the capital, meaning the money, to buy new equipment, right? Doctors always want the latest, greatest stuff. Well, sometimes you can get that. Sometimes you have to tell the doctor, you know, I appreciate that you really want this thing that costs $1 million, but we still have last year's version and it still works. So we're going to hold off on that. But, you know, it also takes, you know, so Exeter Hospital down the street is going to be building a new tower, right? They're going to be building like basically half a new hospital again. So they have to go out and borrow $150 million, right? So that's finance. That's doing, you know, finding the resources for the organization to function and to keep flowing. I like to say that money is the blood of the organization, right? No money, you know, it's like blood draining out of your body. You can't function that long without it. And there's a phrase in healthcare that goes, no money, no mission, right? So a lot of times, you know, our erstwhile and deeply caring providers and nurses want to say, you know, damn the costs, we're going to do whatever, right? And then people like me have to come in and say, if you do whatever for this person, that means we can't take care of these other 20 over here. Just bear that in mind, you know, as we make that decision. You're the clinician, you got to make that decision. But bear in mind, if you know, spend all the money on this one person, these other 20 people are also need your care, and we're not going to be able to provide for them. So we have to kind of find a balance, you know. I talked a little bit about IT, right? Human resources, it's an amazing thing. And it's an amazing thing whether you're in healthcare or not. Finding the right people, helping them find the right jobs. So I've been joking about, like, do you care about answering the phone? Well, if you don't, then you probably don't belong in operations. Let's find something else for you to do. Do you like being with people? No? Okay, finance is where you belong, right? Or do you like being with people, but you don't want to, you know, get bloody? Well, maybe being a hospital, you know, being a nursing home administrator is the right thing to do. So human resources deals with matching the right people to the right job. It deals with moving people on when it turns out that they're no longer the right person for the right job, right? So there's a piece of that. But it also is involved in things like critical to our course, right? How do we create a compensation package for individuals that will make our organization the most appealing place for them to want to work? And that'll typically include things like it. So there's a subset of human resources called compensation and benefits, or comp and ben, right? They kind of, you know, when they're trying to be cool, they say, well, I do comp and ben. So comp and ben, looks at how do I find, how do we figure out what a competitive salary is for each of our jobs? And then what other benefits are we going to wrap around that to make our organization the most appealing place to work? And that includes things like health insurance. Right? So HR negotiates for health insurance for most organizations. So there's all these different functions that come together to make a hospital, or healthcare organization, or frankly, any organization, whether it's healthcare or not, operate. When I was a lieutenant I was a medical platoon leader in the 3rd ACR, which is a tank unit. So I was responsible for the medical care. So I had 36 medics and a PA, and whenever we would go to, we'd pick up a doctor who would be with us kind of part-time. And I worked, so my platoon was part of the support troop, we called it in other, and so the support troop included the medics, the mechanics, the fuelers, ammunition handlers, cooks, and pretty much. So all the kind of unsexy stuff that a tank unit needs, right? Like tanks break down, they drive like a mile down the road and they break down and then they need to be repaired. It's kind of crazy. But, and they burn like 2 gallons a mile, right? So they need tons and tons of fuel. And so but the tankers are kind of arrogant guys, and so they're kind of like, oh, you just, oh, you fuelers over there, oh, you medics, you're not cool like us. And so my boss, the company commander or troop commander, was a former tanker, and he came over to take command of the troop command of the support troop. And he hung, I will never forget this. I actually found him on LinkedIn the other day. It's just like 25 years ago. And I wrote a note to him. I said, hey, remember this? He hung a banner above the entry to our headquarters building. And it said, try fighting without us, right? Which is really a cool idea, right? So like, how far are you going to go in your tank when it breaks down? There's no mechanic that shows up. What are you going to do, when the bad guys show up and you run out of ammunition or you run out of fuel, right? And so that has always stuck with me as kind of, you can take that idea, right? Every organization has its sexy kind of front end where they're doing the cool things, right? And then it has the less sexy back end where everything, where things have to be done in order for the organization to function. I remember one of the guys I worked with, he took over this what's called the support platoon, which he owned the mechanics and the fuelers and the ammunition guys. And he said, before I took this job, when I was a tanker running around, we'd get a radio call, hey, meet the fuelers at wherever, and we'd just show up, and there the fuelers would be, and ammunition, and somebody had brought out chow for us and so forth. He's like, I just never thought about it. It just the stuff just showed up. He's like, now I realize how hard that is, right? So that's what administrators do, right? We make the organization operate, and when an administrator does their job well, his or her job well, nobody notices, right? It's like, well, of course they're there, right? Of course the fuel is there, of course the food is there, right? Of course the nurses are ready for the operation. Of course we have all of the implements that the orthopedic surgeon is going to be putting into your body. Of course it's all there, right? That does not happen by accident. And it's the result of very hard work by a lot of people putting systems into place. So the thing about being an administrator is, and it's an interesting thing because I'm having you, have any of you watched the Doc Vader clip yet? Yeah, it's funny. Well, so it's meant to be, it's cute, right? But it is like the reason I have you watch that is because my father, who was a doctor for many, many years, believes that, like, that's him. Like my dad could just be sit there and and tell me, he still tells me, administrators don't really do anything. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, you got paid, right? That somebody did that, right? Your supplies showed up, right? Yeah, somebody did that too, so there's a kind of there's conflict, right? Social conflict between administrators and doctors. And the reason is not that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's we have very different focuses on the organization. Physician is very much focused on the individual and the individual patient, and caring for the individual patient. And they tend to do things like they want, they will come and say, I want this new piece of equipment, and that costs, millions of dollars. And they'll be like, I don't care how much it costs, just get it, just go. And the administrator has to say, again, if I buy that, I can't buy this other thing. And by the way, you know what? I know you really want to get like a new MRI, but you know what the hospital really needs? It really needs a new air exchange. Because if we don't get the air exchange fixed, right, the HVAC system fixed, when we operate on patients in the OR, germs are going to stay in the OR, and they're not going to get pumped out properly, right? So it's not sexy to make sure that the HVAC works, but it's crucial. And so the physician's focus tends to be very much on the patient, whereas the administrator is focused on the operation as a whole. And so it's different level. They're both really important, but they happen at different levels, and they run into that conflict because then when all the physician hears somebody like me say is no. And then they remember that and they're like, every time I talk to you, you say no. And I'm like, well, that's because, I'm worried about I don't care. I want to take care of my patients. So that's where the conflict comes in. And neither one of them is wrong. It's just that we have different levels of focus. And that's one of the things that physicians struggle with as they move into leadership roles, is they have to kind of step back from the individual patient focus and start to understand, oh, wow, this process, it really is complicated. The stuff doesn't just show up, right? Somebody has to make it show up. So it's a neat field if you care about, answering the phones or making everything work. All right, so a couple of minutes left. Your book talks at length about, so we talk about trends in healthcare staffing. One of the big things has been physician specialization versus general practice. And we generally, the US generally, we bemoan about the fact that we have too many specialists, not enough general practitioners. There's a shortage of primary care. I showed you the compensation for the different fields. So if you're going to go through, take out a couple $100,000 in loans, and you're going to go for 8, 9, 10, 11 years of training post baccalaureate, it's really hard to set aside like, well, I could go over here and make 250, or I can go over here and make $750,000 a year. Like that has an impact on people's decision making. And a big piece of that is because we have the government in particular has stepped in and created compensation systems, and we're going to look at that later, but has created compensation systems that reward procedures more than they reward evaluation and management. So your primary care doctor is primarily doing kind of problem solving with you, trying to figure out what's wrong with you. That's very much all about evaluation and management. But your surgeon is doing a procedure. They're taking out your gallbladder, they're doing whatever. The compensation that has been built into the system prefers providers who do procedures over providers who do kind of intellectual work, right? The primary care. Not that surgery is not intellectual, but they don't, your primary care doctor is not cutting on you. And so this has been designed, right, by the AMA and by the government. And that's why surgeons make 3 times as much as primary care providers. And then we ask, why don't we have enough primary care providers? Well, I don't know. Maybe you could pay them more and then we'd get more. So we have a lot of shortages and staffing shortages in rural areas, right? So this is a problem. Don't repeat this. Of course, I'm going to put it on YouTube in a minute, but maybe people shouldn't live in rural areas, right? Like that's a thing that we have to ask ourselves is, is the problem we don't have enough providers in rural areas, or do we have too many people living in rural areas and they should move to the city? So this is a thing, that we'll come back to talk more about that. Let's see. All this kind of, whenever you start to get into all this like maldistribution questions, you have to ask yourself, where are the incentives? How have they been structured? right? How much are the incentives the result of things we've done to ourselves, right? Like the compensation thing where you overpay people that do procedures versus people who do management is really just kind of shooting yourself repeatedly in the foot, right? And then you're like, I don't know why my foot hurts. Well, maybe if you stop shooting yourself in the foot, it would hurt less, right? So that's kind of, my perspective on that. All right, so you can read that. A lot of increases, a lot of training creep. So used to be you could do a 4-year OT, then it was a master's degree. It's growing into OTD. You're going to do 7 years, right? So why is it more expensive to do healthcare? Well, because I make my OTs do 3 more years of training than I used to, right? So, all right. Enjoy. We'll see you. I should have the exams done tonight. We'll talk about that next week.